I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. Do you know what I'm talking about?
This is that YouthSpin Show. This is that YouthSpin Show. This is that YouthSpin Show.
Good evening, radio listeners. I'm your host, Radio Rebel, with another week of Youth Spin. You know, you missed us last week, but we're back and we're ready to go. Tonight, I have a guest host with me, and I'll let him introduce himself. You can go right ahead.
Alright, what's up, Anguilla? Here's your boy, Jinsei Kaen. That is the flame of life, and I'm here to bring some light and show you guys the way.
All right. Tonight, we will be talking about domestic violence, and we have a lovely guest with us. Her name is Dr. Ronya Foy-Connor from Queens, New York, who lives here now. Dr. Foy-Connor combines her interest in international studies, community service, and cultural travel through a range of activities. She is a youth teacher and mentor, in addition to a public speaker at career and educational forums. She has worked for the New York City Government Department and United States federal government, as well as in the private sector, assisting with human services, policy planning, and applied research. Ronya has co-facilitated self-improvement courses, conducted individual and group counseling sessions for domestic violence and substance abuse, and is certified as an anger management counselor. She currently works as a Gender Development Coordinator for Anguilla in the newly established Gender Affairs Unit. Ronya is also a travel agent and has visited several countries on every continent except for Antarctica. She loves learning different languages such as Japanese and Swahili. Ooh, interesting. Can you tell us welcome to YouthSpin in Japanese, please?
Oh my gosh, don't put me on the spot like that. I will say it's been a long time since I've taken Japanese, so I think your co-host can probably do that better than I can.
All right.
Or maybe not, but that's all right. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight on YouthSpin.
All right, it's nice to have you here as well. We have a quick announcement from our sponsor, and we'll ask Miss Attitude to come with us.
YouthSpin is sponsored by the Department of Youth and Culture. The Department of Youth and Culture is the main public agency with responsibility for youth development and the preservation and promotion of Anguilla's cultural heritage. For more information about the Department of Youth and Culture, please call 498-3792 or 497-0969 or email youth.culture@gov.ai. You may also visit the department's Facebook page at DYC Anguilla.
Thank you. We'll now have a little dance break by Christina Perry.
No, I can't take one more step towards you, 'cause all that's waiting is regret. Don't you know I'm not your ghost anymore? You lost the love I loved the most. I learned to live half alive, and now you want me one more time. And who do you think you are? Running around leaving scars, collecting a jar of hearts and tearing love apart. You're gonna catch a cold from the ice inside your soul, so don't come back for me. Who do you think you are? I hear you're asking all around if I am anywhere to be found, but I have grown too strong to ever fall back in jar of hearts, tearing love apart. You're gonna catch a cold from the ice inside your soul. So don't come back for me. Who do you think you are? It took so long just to feel alright. Remember how to put back the light in my eyes. I wish I had missed the first time that we kissed. 'Cause you broke all your promises, and now you're back. You don't get to
And we're back. Just a brief reminder, you can hit us up on WhatsApp. The number is 729-9410, or you can try our Facebook or Instagram pages, YouthSpin AXA. Now I'll have my co-host come in and give you a little background as to what domestic violence is, just in case you didn't know, you're looking for a bit of a description, and he'll take over from here.
All right, thanks for that. And I'm not too good at being put on the spot myself, but it is actually YouthSpin A Okairi Nasai. So I'd like to personally welcome you all back with that.
Nice.
And just to shine some light on what domestic violence is, then a basic definition would be that domestic violence is a pattern of coercive, controlling behavior that can include physical abuse, emotional or psychological abuse, sexual abuse, or financial abuse. Financial abuse being using money and financial tools to exert control. Domestic violence is a pervasive, life-threatening crime that affects millions of individuals regardless of age, economic status, race, religion, or education. High-profile cases of domestic violence will attract headlines, but thousands of people experience domestic abuse every day. They come from all walks of life. Batterers make it very difficult for victims to escape these relationships, and sadly, many survivors suffer from abuse of decades. It is important to note that survivors of this abuse, it's not their fault, and that they are not alone. Help is available for anyone and everyone who suffers from domestic violence.
All right, thank you for that. I would like to reintroduce our interviewee, Dr. Ronya Foy-Connor, and we'll get right into the discussion. So tell us a little bit about the work of the Gender Affairs Unit.
Well, the Gender Affairs Unit is fairly new to Anguilla. There used to be a women's desk, and for a brief amount of time, there was a gender desk. But as of January 1st, this year, 2014, the Gender Affairs Unit was started, and it's located in the Ministry of Home Affairs, so for the government of Anguilla. So the vision of the unit is to create an equal and humane Anguilla, where every man, woman, girl, and boy has equal opportunities for advancement. And it's not just advancement, say, in economic life, but to have advancement in social life, in political opportunities. So this is what the Gender Affairs Unit is structured to do. As I mentioned, it's a new unit, and so far I would say we've made a mark. So Women's Week that happened in honor of International Women's Day in March, that was one of the first programs that we put on. And also, to complement it, of course, we had a Men's Week, which is in celebration of Father's Day, and that was in June of 2014. So we're looking to have both of those events every single year, just to celebrate the girls and women on our island, the young men, and the men on our island, and all the great achievements that they do. Something else that we're looking into is legislation for domestic violence, and this is appropriate for what we're talking about tonight. And it's pretty much putting together something on the books for Anguilla, because right now we do not have a domestic violence legislation. So there are protections available under the criminal code, but we want specific protections for those who are facing domestic violence situations or who are in fear of violence. So gender affairs is pretty much about spreading this knowledge around our community, spreading this awareness, and just doing public service to this end.
All right, thank you. And I noticed that you mentioned that a lot of people in Anguilla aren't really aware of this whole domestic violence legislation because there is none there. And I found it interesting that the records of the Anguilla police force show that in the last 3 years, between 2010 and October 2013, that there were 735 reported incidents of domestic violence. And that's like 1 for every 20 people in Anguilla. And I find that very alarming because even though my co-host read about what domestic violence is, some people still believe it's all about the hitting, all of that. But can you give us your understanding of what domestic violence really is?
Right. You know, I think your co-host did a wonderful job of explaining what domestic violence is. And as you mentioned, it's not just about hitting. That is part of it. Physical abuse is part of it, but it goes beyond that. You know, it's emotional abuse, psychological abuse, which may even be threatening or isolating someone from their friends or their family, having to know their whereabouts, you know, all the time texting or calling or, you know, whatever it may be on Facebook. What are you doing? Where are you? Who are you with? You know, it's this type of coercive, abusive behavior that is domestic violence. And, you know, I will say a lot of people on Anguilla do know about domestic violence, and they do know that we had a draft legislation, which was from 2011, but it did not get passed. Yeah. So that same 2011 legislation is what we're now looking at and reworking. And hopefully by next month, it will be put forward to the House so that it can be voted on. But we definitely need more young people to stand up, to get involved, and to say, this is something we care about, and we want to make sure that we have protections on our island.
Yeah, now that you said that, I do remember attending a seminar. I think I was in Third Farm. It was somewhere around there. And we were ready for this bill to pass because it was in the school. And then afterwards, you hear all the big fuss, and then it just blew off like nothing happened. And I'm glad that it's being brought up because it's an issue that needs addressing, and let's get it done this year. Let's get it done this year.
Well, you know, luckily, Minister Jerome Roberts is really influential in putting this forward, and it's something that he wants to see happen. So I'm particularly thankful that, you know, we have someone in power and leadership who is moving this forward.
Okay. So is there any pertinent information that we need to know, or any personal experiences you can relate to us so that we can get a better understanding?
In terms of
the legislation, and then personal experiences or accounts that you could share with us.
Sure. Well, the legislation is really going to cover a lot of topics, not just domestic violence within a home, but it's also going to look at domestic violence in dating relationships. It's going to look at domestic violence in what we call visiting relationships, which means that, you know, you may not be married, you may not be boyfriend and girlfriend, but you have a visiting relationship, which may be a sexual relationship, and in that there's some type of abuse or violence that's occurring. So it will cover this as well. Something that really stands out in the legislation that people relate to is the fact that you can get a protection order, and that protection order can be, can be renewed. So if you have a protection order, it expires, and you still feel like there's a threat by this individual or even someone else, you can get that protection order renewed. So those are just a few things that the legislation will cover. But I think one other thing I want to mention is that it also will cover electronic communications, such as social media, so threats that may be made through social media.
Ooh,
so that's really progressive for Anguilla.
So someone will be monitoring this social media so we can detect it?
That, you know what, that would be the next level that we would really want to be able to do. But in this case, it would just be that if you show proof that someone is maybe texting you, or they're sending you emails, or maybe you know, on Facebook or something, they're posting certain information, then that could be used as evidence, as proof that this person is abusive. In that case, it would probably be verbally abusive, or it could be even emotional or psychological.
Okay.
All right. Well, to talk about the different types of domestic violence, then obviously there's physical, which would be the beating, emotional and psychological, which is more where you're verbally abusing them. and sexual, but I think that one that isn't often touched on and isn't often talked about is financial abuse.
Right.
So I understand that financial abuse is mainly where someone uses like their position in the household to hold that person down, saying something like, since I bring in the money, then if you leave, then you've got nowhere to go.
Right.
But does that extend beyond that in any way?
Yes, that's part of it. The idea of one individual who can control all of the finances, control the money, control credit cards, control a bank account, that's part of financial abuse. But it could also be preventing someone from going to school or preventing them from going to work. And the idea is that if you prevent someone from going to school, you're preventing them from getting an education and thereby furthering their abilities to earn more income. So the same for work. If you prevent someone from going to work, then you're pretty much cutting off their monetary supply and their financial ability to do well for themselves. Another thing with financial abuse may be forcing someone to do work that they don't want to do. And we can see this happening in terms of prostitution that may not be by the person's own choice, or the idea of human trafficking. All of this, not only is it emotionally abusive, but it's financially abusive as well.
Well, there's also something that I've heard of a couple of times. I'm not entirely sure if it's financial abuse, so if we could shine some light on that. It's the situation where, say, somebody's continually coming to somebody who might be in the same situation as them or something along the lines of that, and they're just continuously taking money from that person, borrowing it, promising to pay it back, and then they never do, but they continue coming to take the money, and they like hold things over their head like, I did this for you all this time ago. Does that also count as financial abuse?
Yes, that's also financial abuse. And in some cases you'll see in a relationship where there's children involved, you may have one, either the mother or father, because it can go either way. It's not, domestic violence is not just a man to a woman, but it can be a woman to a man, or it can be a man to a man or a woman to a woman. So you also see in some cases where there's children involved that one parent may not allow the other parent to see the child or even to spend quality time with them, but yet they want them to buy Pampers or to buy food or to just give money to provide for the child. And that can actually be financial abuse, because you're giving the money without having the benefit of forming the relationship with a child.
And I think it's interesting because another thing about financial abuse is it's often not something that can be pinpointed as easily as the other types of abuse. But also, I'm kind of happy that you mentioned how abuse is not only man to woman, but man to man, woman to woman. And what's funny is it is said that 15% of men, it's 85% of the people being abused are women, and the other 15% are men. But what I learned the other day, which I found interesting, is the fact that out of all those men, then it's not by a woman themselves, but it's mainly along the lines of perhaps they're a gay couple, which is where the man is experiencing this abuse.
And also with that statistic that you mentioned, the 85% may be physical abuse. We may see that as the primary form of abuse. But in the other 15%, it may be verbal abuse, because it is the case that, women, if I may, I'm not going to generalize, but if I may speak overall, women have a way with words. I'll put it that way, and it's not a dagger in your heart. But if someone says something to you, if a woman says something to you, it may feel like a dagger.
It stays with you for a long time.
Exactly. It can stay with you. So verbal abuse is something that we can see more so prevalent among women, where physical abuse may be among men. Maybe, I say, because it varies.
There was a social experiment that some people conducted once where they just wanted to see how people reacted to public abuse. And where the woman was being abused, then everyone instantly ganged up on the guy, tried to figure out what he was doing, and tried to tell him to back off. But the very next day, then they tried it with the woman being the abuser, and everyone just kept walking and didn't even take a second glance at what was going on. So
yeah, that's a good example.
It's like everyone's always talking about domestic abuse towards women, but they hardly ever mention the men. And even when it's happening right before their eyes, then most people don't want to notice it.
And there is a stereotype as well that says that if men report instances of domestic violence, that they would be considered less of a man or be seen as weaker, which is something that we really need to get rid of, because that's not the case. Anybody who's being abused, whether a man or a woman, a boy or a girl, anybody needs to be able to come forward and to speak up. So even in those statistics, we see that, well, maybe just women are reporting it more, where men are still suffering from domestic violence, but may not be as comfortable coming forward and expressing it.
And I do agree, because we have people who ask questions, why do they stay in these abusive relationships? I know I have some comments on Twitter right here. Some of them, hashtag why I left. I left because I realized I was living in constant fear of someone who loved me, someone who treated me as though I was a piece of trash. And we were talking about the men are also part of domestic violence, but it's still the question, why do they refrain from doing this? Yes, we understand that you may think you're less of a man, but according to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, this domestic violence is one of the most chronically underreported crimes and never reported to the police. Why would you, my opinion, why would you want to stay in that relationship? There has to be someone to help. And I know in Anguilla, there's this cycle of silence, but it must be broken, because as we looked at those statistics, it shocked me. Anguilla is not that big, and yet to see all of these cases reported over 3 years, that is overwhelming. I don't know if you have anything to say on that one, but to me, we need to break the cycle of silence. It's killing us as a people, because we're watching our loved ones go to waste, and then what you're going to say? If I only had, if, it's just a conditional term.
You're right. And I do think, given the population, that we shouldn't be seeing such large numbers. And I want to make a point that the numbers that you have there, they seem like they're very large, but that's just from the people who reported it. So imagine who are the ones who are still being silent, who still think that maybe there's no one who can identify with them. And you had mentioned a little bit earlier about, well, why do people stay in these relationships? Why do you stay in an abusive or violent relationship? And it's such a complicated question with so many different layers, because I speak to women. I know there are men out there, but I haven't been able to speak to any yet. They haven't come to me. But I've spoken to women who are currently in domestic violence situations, those who have just left, or those who have been out for years and years, but it still affects them. And the question is, well, why did you stay? Or why are you still there? And everyone's saying, well, I have to create a whole new life. And you have to imagine, it's hard to create a whole new life and start over, once you already have established a relationship with someone.
Well, there's actually also a video that's been created by some college students that they post to YouTube. It's called I Love You. And it was a very shocking video to watch, because it showed this woman who was making a wonderful meal and thinking to herself about how much he's going to love it. And when he comes, then she accidentally breaks a glass. And because of that, then he beats her, telling her she deserves it, and she agrees that she deserves it. And when the video ends, then all that she does is look at herself in the mirror, starts applying makeup on the bruises, and then she turns to her husband when he's leaving, and all she says is, I love you.
All right, let me just interject here. You have any questions, comments, or even a personal experience you'd like to relate to us, you can contact us via WhatsApp 729-9410, or try our Facebook pages, YouthSpin AXA. So I just wanted to bridge the gap a bit. We're talking about the men, the women. Do you think lack of parenting, proper parenting over the years, have an impact on the amount of domestic violence we see? Yes, there are youths being impacted, but the parents, do you think it's their parents that could have made them into the people they are?
Yeah, I think what you're mentioning is, could it be cyclical? You're pretty much repeating what you see in your household, and your parents saw that in their household. And I think, yes, there is some truth to that, because you do grow up modeling the things that you see. But at the same time, if we educate one another, then I think we know that domestic violence is wrong. We know that domestic violence is hurtful, and so we don't have to repeat those behaviors. But of those people I've spoken with, they have indicated that the same thing happened in their household. You know, when they were growing up, they saw mom and dad get into arguments. You know, some even get into physical fights back and forth. So it is the case that it is cyclical. But as I always say, anyone can break a cycle. You know, and it starts with the one person who's going to say, I'm not going to repeat the pain that I saw in my household, you know, but I'm going to do something different.
All right. Well, are there any programs currently to, say, assist these children who may find themselves in abusive households? Like,
Well,
they're not being abused themselves, but they've been seeing this happening. So they're worried
Yes,
that this
right now
might-
the Department of Social Development handles cases of abuse and violence with children involved. And also in the Gender Affairs Unit, I'm available personally to talk with anyone confidentially, because I know that's a big issue. People want to make sure that they're safe and they can talk to someone and not hear their story out on the street. So the Gender Affairs Unit is available. There's also the Family Support Network. That's a resource to reach out to. And hopefully, you know, we can post some of these resources online. So people who are listening will be able to go ahead and utilize that if they need to.
Right. And you know, sometimes it's not just, it's still parenting, but in the sense that it's not the parents being present, it's the lack of parenting that causes this cycle to actually begin. Because I actually remember a while ago when I was driving with some friends, then there were some 10-year-olds on their bikes at nighttime, and when they rode past us, then they simulated a drive-by. Like, as they drove past it, they screamed, bam, 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 all of you are dead now. And if something like that is happening now, then it makes you wonder exactly what those parents are doing, per se. But
Yeah, I know we have some younger children listening, and some of them still may not be as clear because they're seeing these things happening over and over. But I have a few signs to tell that you're in an abusive relationship, and I'll bring them right after we come for a commercial break. And we have Miss Attitude back with us.
YouthSpin is sponsored by the Department of Youth and Culture. The Department of Youth and Culture facilitates the development of positive community support systems and continues to support the establishment of various community and youth development centers across Anguilla. The Blowing Point Youth Development Center, the Hope Center in East End, the Leo's Family Center in Sandy Ground, the Island Harbor Community Care Center, and the Pond Ground Community Care Center. These centers have initiated programs to support youth and community development. Programs range from the provision of basic homework assistance to facilitating classes in mathematics, English, social studies, computer skills, basic reading, literacy, writing, and numeracy. The centers welcome volunteers to support their ongoing programs. Dedicate at least 1 hour a week at any center. For further information, please contact Mrs. Hyacinth Bradley, Senior Program Officer of Youth Development at the Department of Youth and Culture at telephone 498-3792. You may also contact the centers directly. For the Blowing Point Youth Development Center, contact Mrs. Jemima Rumney at 584-2860 or email jemima.rumney@gmail.com. For Hope Center, contact Ms. Josette Duncan at 582-2773 or hopeforangola@gmail.com. For the Community Care Center at Island Harbor and Pond Ground, contact Karine Harrigan or Jay Brown at 583-7050 or 581-5147 or email carecenter100@gmail.com. Remember, the centers welcome volunteers to support their ongoing programs. Dedicate at least 1 hour a week at any center.
Okay, thank you. I have a few more events. The AFA football, the men's league, starts on the 25th of October. Please come out to support the men. And the primary school football has started on the Coronation Park in the afternoon, starting at 4 p.m. Come out, show your support for your school, your previous school, or your current school, and just give the youths a bit of support. Also, Christian Heritage Week starts 28th of October. So just keep that in mind. I guess the schedule of events will come out on a later date, but in the meantime, keep it in mind, the 28th of October. Reminding you, any questions, comments, or concerns, you can call us, send us a message, 729-9410, or try our Facebook pages. So we had a question as we come back in. We had a question. Should Anguilla establish a home for domestic violence cases or a hotline? And that one's for you, Dr. O'Connor. Should Anguilla establish a shelter, whether it be for women, men, or children, and then a hotline? Should we establish one?
You know, I think that's a question that everyone who's working on the issue of domestic violence here has been asking, and it's something that everyone sees as very important. Yes, we should have a hotline. It's been discussed with the Royal Anguilla Police Force of having something available, a 24/7 hotline where people can call if they just want information, not even just to report an immediate emergency situation, but just to get information to see if what they're experiencing is domestic violence. And in terms of a safe house or a shelter, yes, definitely. That's something that we would need to have. But I'll tell you, the concern that many people are bringing up is that, is it really going to be a safe house? Since we're such a small island, is it possible to have a shelter that can be private, that can be secure? And that's something that we really need to think about and address, but it's necessary, yes.
So it would be like something like a halfway house? I know I've heard about halfway houses. Or would it be like a full-time kind?
It would be a temporary shelter until a man or woman's able to get back on their feet. Because what you have to realize is sometimes when you're leaving a domestic violence situation or abusive household, your life is there. That's your whole life. It's like if you were just taken out of your family and you were put to survive on your own. So you need certain things to help you get back on your own, financially, socially. A lot of people are isolated from friends and family, so you need a support system around you. So that's what this shelter would provide.
So do you think it would be like a co-ed kind of building, or you'd have them separated?
Most of them are not co-ed. And to be honest with you, most shelters, you find women in them. So I don't think we're too familiar with having men utilize domestic violence shelters.
Okay.
But as I mentioned, it's because of the taboo, because of the stereotypes and the silence surrounding, men reporting instances of domestic violence.
Okay. Let me go back a bit. Some people wanted to know signs that you're in an abusive relationship. I'll let my co-host come from here. But it's just to make some people more aware. And I see you have compiled a document under the Gender Affairs Unit.
Yes.
Signs that you're in an abusive relationship.
All right. Well, to start off, then, in most cases, then people do usually come forth to say that they're in an abusive relationship. But at the same time, then, there are some signs that someone is in an abusive relationship that you should look out for. So here we have a few signs that a person would be in an abusive relationship. One being, do you feel afraid of your partner a lot of the time? And if so, then why? Do they humiliate or yell at you? Do you avoid certain topics out of fear of angering your partner? Or do they criticize and put you down? Do you feel that you can't do anything right for your partner? Do you wonder if you're the one who's crazy or if you're the one at fault? And do you sometimes feel emotionless? Do you feel helpless at sometimes? And these are more signs for you yourself to know if you feel in any way if you are in an abusive relationship, correct?
Yes, that's correct. It's something that you want to ask, how do I feel about this behavior? It's kind of like a self-check. If you don't feel comfortable, if you're being hurt, if you're angry all the time, if you're feeling insulted, put down, then you may be in an abusive relationship. So it's clear signs. If it feels negative, if it feels wrong, then it probably is.
Okay. So we've been talking about those who've been abused, just for those who might be tuning in, people involved in domestic violence. But we haven't really touched the abuser. Why do people abuse? Could you tell us a bit about that? Why do people abuse others?
Sure. You know, the issue is, it's pretty simple, even though it has many layers to it. And what it is, it's about power and control. Anyone who is an abuser, who's a perpetrator of domestic violence, there's some sort of control that they feel to be able to have a say over someone else's life, to be able to tell you what you should do, when you should do it, and how you should do it. And then there's also an issue of power. You know, a lot of people say that those who are abusive, since they so yearn for power, there's a lack of high esteem. There's low self-esteem that they're facing, you know. And then you also have the instance, as we talked about earlier, where maybe you just may have seen this behavior in your household, and you haven't come to a place in your life where you really understand who you are. So you just mimic what you've seen, you know, whether you're a young man who's seen your father doing this to your mother or to another woman, or whether you're a young woman who's seen that dad only responded to mom when she was raising her voice or when she was yelling, you know. So this behavior that you learn, and that's what you tend to do. So that's what an abuser will tend to do, and it's all about power and control over your situation.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned power and control, because we actually have a diagram here which is labeled the power and control wheel, and this basically goes through some examples of these types of abuse and how people carry them out. One of them being using the children. Say you can use your children to make your partner feel guilty. You can simply use the children to relay messages, or you can use visitation to harass them, or you can simply threaten to take the children away, like keep them from seeing them. Another one being the male privilege, where you treat the woman like your servant because you're the man of the household. You have the big say in everything, so she's just supposed to stay back and go along with whatever.
And you know, with that one that you just mentioned, I would say in gender affairs, we're seeing now that it can go both ways, you know. So that's actually amended. It is still considered male privilege, but we're seeing now how both men and women are exercising a certain amount of privilege to show their control over the other person.
Right. There's another big one, which is isolation, where you simply don't let them do as they please. You're the one who has the say in everything. If they want to go out, then it's up to you. If they want to see anyone, then it's up to you. So you're basically limiting their outside involvement, and if they want a reason why, then you can simply use something such as jealousy. Say you don't want them spending time with anybody else.
Right.
Right?
Okay, so I really love this article that you've combined. It has a self-check in the back. Could you be an abuser? Because we've realized that people doing the abusing don't really know they're doing it. It just seems like an everyday thing. So it comes to the point where they don't even know. So before we go to a little dance break, I'll just give you a few signs to check to see if you are the abuser. Do you get angry or insecure about your boyfriend or girlfriend or spouse's relationships with others, whether that be friends, family, co-workers, and feel possessive? Do you frequently call to text or check up on your partner, or have them check in with you? Do you spy on your partner in different ways? We know we have lots of social media around. You can either read their emails, check their texts, voicemails, whatever. Do you feel like your partner needs to ask your permission to go out, get a job, go to school, or spend time with others? And do you blow up in anger at small incidents or mistakes that your partner makes? And we'll go to a song by Taurus Riley, Start Anew.
She, I know she looks so. Dark glasses. I know she. And how she walks up. You know, some of her ask her. Hey there, what's wrong, woman? Looks like you're feeling down inside. He says he loves you, but he might beat you when him feel like and it's not right. Where him really feel like, oh, him fi beat you, then want take your clothes off, abuse and mistreat you, then later on seduce you, make him know him not get no loving if a sudden star. And the strength where him a take a beat, take it go fight war. Face too pretty for a wear scar. He'll never get to Zion if him break your heart. Cut it off, let it go, start anew. Cut it off, and find someone who love you, girl. Cut it off, life too short. Cut it off, no afraid to start over. Cut it off, I saw the healing start. You know it's not right. We'll leap up for some fight. You want something on your eye, mom. Later on, one light down. You know it's not right. You're not the most I sight. And there is nothing domestic about it. My girl, I better you allow it. Oh, him fi beat you. Then want take your clothes off, abuse and mistreat you, then later on seduce you, make him know him not get no loving if a sudden star. And strength where him a take a beat, take it to fight war. Face too pretty for a wear scar. He'll never get to Zion if him break your heart. You got to love yourself before you love someone, girl. Never you hurt your flesh in the name of love. No, you got to love yourself before you love someone. True. Never you hurt your flesh in the name of love. No, you can't make him beat you. Then want take your clothes off, abuse and mistreat you, then later on seduce you, make him know him not get no loving if a sudden star. And the strength way ma take a beat, take it to fight war. Face too pretty for a wear scar. He'll never get to Zion if him break your heart. It's not right. We'll leap up fuss and fight. And every night when they make you cry, what time you feel like you want to die, you know it's not.
Alright guys, welcome back to YouthSpin, Jinsei here, and I hope you all enjoyed our dance break. And before we move on to the next question, then we have received a question from one of our listeners, this involving what I said earlier, how do you know if someone is in an abusive relationship? And I know one of the things is these people are oftentimes trying to hide their scars or bruises, so you can see them more often than not wearing longer articles of clothing. But are there any other more obvious or more discreet ways in which someone tries to hide their abuse?
So you're pretty much talking about signs that you could know that maybe your friend or family member is being abused, but they wouldn't necessarily tell you.
Right.
Yeah. Well, you'll see there may be some sort of avoidance. So I always say if you think something is wrong, to go to that person, pull them aside in a private place and just ask them, are you okay? Is everything all right? And you have to let them know that you're there to support them and that they can trust you. And I find that once you develop the trust, then a person wants to come forward because a person wants to tell you something's wrong, you know, and I need your help. But besides seeing scars, which would be a physical abuse, in terms of emotional abuse, you may find that maybe that friend that you had who was bubbly, personable, is now a little bit more somber, a little sadder, or maybe doesn't interact with you as often as they used to. You know, maybe you would go and hang out, and now maybe they're busy. You know, they have other things to do, or they're very short and quick on the phone. This can be a sign of many different things, but it can also be signs of someone who's in an abusive relationship. And, you know, unfortunately, I am hearing about in the high school that it's happening all the time with boyfriend-girlfriend relationships. And some people are seeing the evidence. They're seeing black eyes. And someone may make an excuse and just say, oh, you know, I was walking in the middle of the night and I bumped into the door, or something like that. You know, these little things that when you think about it, you say, no, that doesn't sound right. You know, then you go with your first instinct. Maybe there's something underlying it. Maybe something is wrong.
Okay. So I'd like to bring it a little personal, bring it to Anguilla, because you're talking about in the high schools that people are actually noticing it. And um, do you think the economy and the social environment affects domestic violence? I mean, like, let's say they're stressed in the home and they're bringing it to school with them, because we know domestic violence also affects our youth, whether it be teen dating in the violence arena and that part. What do you think about that?
Yes, I would say the hard economic times, it can create an atmosphere for violence, because even as we've seen with the involvement in drugs and gun violence, some people say that it has to do with unemployment, and with young men who are involved in these crimes just not having another outlet, not being able to make money, and is causing friction, and in terms of domestic violence, economic situations lead to higher stress. So when people are more stressed, they tend to act out, be more quick-tempered, can possibly get angry faster, So being able to find a job or not being able to find a job, if you're in school thinking about, are you going to continue on to sixth form, or are you going to start working with your family? If so, what job can you get? All of these bring pressures and stress. And so it can interfere with the way a person would normally function,
So with that being the case, and that means it's also possible, say, you've been with this person for a year or more, and because of these situations, then the relationship becomes abusive.
Right.
If that's the case, then is it possible that these are just temporary in a way?
That's a great question, because I think a lot of people, they try to justify why abuse is happening. He had too much to drink and he was drunk. That's why he hit me. Or right. It's a stressful time, money's tight. That's why we were arguing and, whatever happened. And that's why, there were threats to kill me. And I think when that happens, you cannot just say, okay, it's based on the economy, it'll get better. Because you never know if it's going to get better. And you may end up in a horrible situation before it gets better. Mm-hmm. There's a poem that I know is going to be shared a little bit later, and it talks about a woman getting flowers, and she always made excuses. Oh, he brought me flowers, he was sorry. Today he hit me, he brought me flowers, he was sorry. And at the end of the poem, you'll see, when the person receives the flowers, it's a situation that was not expected. Mm-hmm. So you can never make excuses for that behavior. If anything, the person who is being abusive, they need to go and seek counseling. If they're under stress, they need to talk with somebody to be able to work through that. But abuse is never an excuse for any situation.
All right. Well, going back to these teens in abusive relationships, then we actually have an article here labeled Dating Violence. And dating violence is basically where these teenagers are just starting their relationships, and they're already finding themselves in these abusive situations. So we have things like why it begins, and teen dating violence is often hidden because these teens, they're inexperienced with dating. They are pressured by their peers to act violently. This would be on the abuser's part. And they more have a romantic view of love. So they're thinking, he will change, she will change, and everything's going to get better as things go on. And it goes on to say why young men might be the abusers. It's because they have the right to control their female partners in any necessary way. And because of that, then they might demand intimacy in some sense. And young women may continue because they're responsible for solving any problems. So how do you feel about that, really?
Right. And I think with dating violence, that's where we really see the idea of sexual abuse. Because with dating comes along, we don't want to say, but alcohol use, drug use, it's part of the atmosphere that some people engage in while they're dating. And with that, you have things like date rape, which is a form of sexual abuse. And it's possible that the two individuals may not even remember what happened. They may not even know what happened. and that's part of dating violence. On top of that, now with just everyone being social, it's social media, it's very possible that things that were private are now public knowledge. Dating one person, whatever may have happened on that date is now public knowledge if someone posts details, or posts information that may not paint the other person in a positive light, but is negative. So all of this it's the new face of dating violence, and it's a very serious issue.
Okay, so we're at that 10-minute mark, and we know that October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So can you tell us about some initiatives that are occurring locally, regionally, and internationally, just so our listeners could be aware?
Sure. Well, internationally, there are a lot of awareness concerts that are going on. People are putting together public service announcements showing just how serious domestic violence is, and this is around the world. I know Australia has been really forward moving and forward thinking in how they portray violence, and they do it very bluntly. Their advertisements show the effects on men, on women, and on children. So there's going to be a lot of these public campaigns going on internationally, and also this is the case throughout the region. Here in Anguilla, we're going to continue bringing awareness about what domestic violence is, about the types of violence and abuse, because unfortunately people still think that it's just physical, which, as we talked about, it's a lot more than just physical. It's emotional and psychological, financial, and so many other sexual, so many other types of abuse. So there are pamphlets that's created. It'll be available in the Gender Affairs Unit, and we're also going to have them spread out through the community so people can pick them up and feel free to learn more information. Also on October 31st, we'll have a street talk, which is going to be in the Valley in front of the People's Market. It's going to be from 4 to 6 p.m. along with the Anguilla Community Action Network, and we're going to actually talk about the link between domestic violence and HIV and AIDS. And I think it's one that people tend not to put together. But it's the case that those who are involved in domestic violence situations, they tend to also be promiscuous and have more than one sexual partner. So now we look at the issue of HIV, AIDS, and also STIs that can be spread. As we know, it has no age, so everybody can be affected. So we're going to really put this forward, and also we're thinking about some visual campaigns. We want to work with the National Youth Ambassadors and put some things together. But that's in the works, so stay tuned for that.
Yes, we are ready and willing to help. So as we wrap up, we'd like your closing remarks on this last question. What can we do as individuals to create awareness or help persons who are being abused and those who abuse in Anguilla?
Well, I would say that it starts with us as individuals. As we mentioned, we need to do self-checks. In terms of, could you be an abuser? Don't be so quick to say, no, I'm not an abuser, but really do a self-check. What are some ways that I can change my behaviors? Do I have a bad temper? Do I get angry really easily? Because those little things can turn into something explosive. So I think we have to realize when we're being abusive, when we're being offensive to other people. So check ourselves, and then we can check one another.
Right. And also there is one other way where you can help create awareness, and that is by checking out our show again. And I know you all might be wondering, how can you do that when it's on the radio? But it's very important that I need to make this announcement, and that is because hopefully by the end of this week, then YouthSpin will be available to everyone on YouTube. You should be able to find us just by looking for YouthSpin on the YouTube website. And hopefully by the end of this week, then we will have available our jet ski debate, and later on this episode being domestic violence, as well as all episodes after that, very soon after the show has been aired.
All right, so on behalf of the whole YouthSpin team and the Department of Youth and Culture, Dr. Connor, we would love to say thank you for being here. It was a very informative session. I kind of forgot I was being a host because I was mentally taking notes, because these things need to be shared. We need to make sure everyone knows, and as youths, it begins with us.
Right.
So I would just like to tell you thank you, and to all those listening, if you have a problem, you can contact her at the Department of Gender Affairs in the Home
the
Affairs.
Gender Affairs Unit,
Mhm.
the Ministry of Home Affairs. The number is 497-2518. Or you can contact me by email, Ronya C, is RONYAC, @gov.ai.
Okay, and thank you. We have a bit of shout-outs, birthday announcements, and I'll have my co-host take over.
All right, so if you all are listening, and I hope you are, then I'm going to be more than happy to send our shout-outs. Firstly, to our interviewee right now, Dr. Ronya Foy-Connor. I'd like to thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you.
We'd also like to extend our shout-outs to the Diamond Football Club and the Paradigm Solutions, the good people at Anglic who are working very hard, and we are really looking forward to getting some current in Northside, North Hill, and Island Harbor. I'd also like to thank our tech guy Kenville, the youth ambassadors and the council, the Department of Youth and Culture, and the youth activists, as well as Hurricane Gonzalo, because a lot of us were enjoying this break despite all the cleaning we had to do after.
So I have some birthday announcements for tomorrow. Aisha Proctor celebrating, Brittany Levon, Glenicia Samuel, Kishana Hodge, and Shanina Gums. Let's just give them a little round of applause in here. And we do hope you enjoy your day despite all the cleaning and stuff we had to do, thanks to Hurricane Gonzalo. Just make sure you turn up a little bit. Okay, we'll have our spoken word piece by Miss Attitude.
I got flowers today. It wasn't my birthday or any other special day. We had our first argument last night and he said a lot of cruel things that really hurt me. I know that he is sorry and didn't mean to say the things that he said because he sent me flowers today. I got flowers today. It wasn't our anniversary or any other special day. Last night he threw me into a wall and then started to choke me. It seemed like a nightmare, but you wake up from nightmares to find that they aren't real. I woke up this morning sore and bruised all over. I know he must be sorry because he sent me flowers today. I got flowers today. And it wasn't Valentine's Day or any other special day. Last night he beat me and threatened to kill me. Makeup and long sleeves didn't hide the cuts and bruises this time. I couldn't go to work because I didn't want anyone to know. But I know he is sorry because he sent me flowers today. I got flowers today. And it wasn't Mother's Day or any other special day. Last night he beat me again, and it was much worse than all the other times. If I leave him, what will I do? How will I take care of the kids? What about money? I'm afraid of him and too scared to leave him. But he must be sorry because he sent me flowers today. I got flowers today. Today was a very special day. It was the day of my funeral. Last night he finally killed me. I was beaten to death. If only I would have gathered enough courage and strength to leave him. So I got flowers today for the very last time.
Hey, thank you, Miss Attitude. That was a very heartwarming poem because we need to keep these things in mind. And to the listening audience, thank you for tuning in tonight and hope to see you next week where we have another show. Thanks for listening. This is your host, Radio Rebel, and we're out.
The views expressed were exclusively those of the speaker or speakers and did not necessarily reflect the views of the station or the management and staff of Radio Anguilla.